highlighting,
Recording in progress.
thank you. This was highlighting the scope of the chapter, and normally in an ordinance, when a scope is stated, it's saying this is the scope that applies to all relevant sections here and after. And this language is important here in that it's stating this chapter applies to all extensions of public water lines, sewer lines, and streets within the town and within the extraterritorial jurisdiction of the town. So I think this language is something that if you're wanting to clarify, particularly for properties in the ETJ being required to have town water and or MSD sewer extended to it, this language needs to be modified to differentiate what happens in town and or what happens in the ETJ.
Well, if we take it out the requirements, then isn't this just a it's just a statement. Honestly, say that it doesn't apply elsewhere. It's still true.
Just doing a quick read. Extensions.
As is. I don't think any changes are necessary to two, in my opinion.
I would agree. I think it's fine. I think it's fine.
Scott, you okay with it?
Yes, I believe section 3 is actually the more pertinent
Yeah.
language.
I have a lot of problems with 3, but
2
2
is okay. 3, I just made enough to take it out.
otherwise it's got to be modified greatly.
And part of the issue also, just from a overall usability, readability of the ordinance is that, so this is chapter M extensions, whereas we just went through chapter E. Let's see, let me look back at my notes here. We just went through chapter E, utilities, water and sewer. An overall update might be better to essentially move elements of chapter M, extensions of water, sewer, etc., into chapter E. Chapter M was obviously added later and it was a separate chapter, but just in terms of a comprehensive approach of, here are all the rules regarding water, sewer, utilities. I'm going to suggest that it might be a better idea to just move chapter M to the end of chapter E in essence.
Renumber them there.
That's one suggestion, just in terms of, so essentially, if you're looking at the heading of chapter E, it's utilities, water and sewer, or you could call it water and wastewater, again, keeping inconsistency. Chapter M is, it's specifically regarding extensions of those utilities, but again, just from a general usability and comprehensiveness, if you had elements of chapter M, i.e. extensions within chapter E, that would just read through more consistently.
Are y'all okay with that? In other words, not making any changes, but moving it and eliminating chapter M.
Moving. What are we moving there?
We're moving,
Consolidating elements of chapter M, which regards extensions of utilities under chapter E, which is already currently headed as utilities, water and sewer.
But you are getting rid of number 3.
Are we deleting this number 3?
Got to.
yeah. I think we ought to leave it here. And we can come back, as Mason had suggested earlier. If we start trying to do that,
Sure,
it may not work.
it's a longer term, probably larger.
But we
fix.
are deleting this section 3, private wells and septic systems in its entirety. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's my understanding. My understanding.
That's
Okay,
correct.
going on to section 2 on page 6. I thought that was all
I
okay.
suggest no change.
Section 2, section, subparagraph 2.
Approval of proposed extension. No change.
Scott had highlighted the director of public works. Saying confirmation of this thing. I guess that's okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Say what?
Bill, could I ask us to revisit the last sentence of section 3, which deals with another public policy issue that is separate from what I think we all want eliminated. And again, this is I've seen this type of provision in many municipal ordinances, which in effect says that when public water or sewer lines are extended, that property owners that have previously built private systems are required to connect to the public systems. Again, I realize there's some caveats to that state statute on with respect to potable water, where somebody doesn't like chlorine, or whatever. But I think this is another issue that I don't want to throw I don't know if it's not quite appropriate, the baby out with the bathwater, but this last sentence of section 3, we may want to leave in at least at some appropriate place in the ordinance, or at least talk about it before we jettison it.
Mason, I hear you. Just a couple of responses. Number one, you're right. We'd have to put that exception to that statute dealing with the wells. The other thing is, and I don't have the statute in front of me, Susan may can recall which one it is. I think in those situations, the town has the option, and obviously it'd be the town council's decision, to either require them to hook it up in those situations, or as an option to requiring them, the town can start charging the minimum fee for that service, the sewer service in this case, even if they don't hook up at all, or they could be required to hook up if their septic tank becomes defective. I've seen that before, and I think there's a statute that gives that option to the council. You can either require them to hook up or just start charging them a minimum fee. The low fee that's charged to everybody else, the minimum fee charged for that service.
On the policy issue, Mason, I'm not sure I agree, because if I've been permitted to put in my system and it's working fine, there's no complaints, then why should I be required? Does that mean I'm going to have to pay part of the extension fee that the town is assessed against all the owners that are going to be on the line? So I would lobby for taking it out. We need to have some other discussion on this, because it's just.
Well, I think you can take it out, because in cases I'm familiar with at ETJ, there's one really good system and there's one really poor system. And when you got a poor system, that's a simple thing to require them to connect. And not allow them to upgrade it.
I think it's also, just to Mason's question, I think it's also generally a larger policy question of, is the town, I guess from a conservative risk management standpoint, municipal water and MSD sewer are much less likely to fail than an individual well and septic system. And I suppose that's perhaps the larger policy question, and that's typically, I would assume, the rationale for when a town requires connectivity. Just looking at the state statute, which again, I think we can all agree is, it's definitely interesting in some aspects. I think that's the larger policy question that perhaps the Board of Commissioners would go into as well, just from a, I guess, looking at the potential impact to the town and any kind of long-term risk management of a failure, looking at the failure rate of, again, a town water MSD sewer connection versus the failure rate of an individual well and septic system on a given property.
I agree that the septic system works. is the more compelling situation, particularly when we have in the ETJ area up Graybeard, a number of properties immediately in the immediate vicinity of Flat Creek. If sewer is in fact provided up there, in my opinion, they should be required to disconnect from their septic systems and connect to the public sewer system. It otherwise makes it impossible without assurance of that for the city or town to know that it can fund the extension of the system.
You say
And I-
that the owner, so are they gonna have to pay the fees? I mean, not the ongoing fees, but the cost to, their proportionate share of the cost to extend.
And I
I
think the
don't-
real problem here in this situation is, right now, there's no sewage offered up there. So do they have to have the line built, 1,000 feet or more just to accommodate? Or should it read that if a septic system fails, they are required to replace it with all the due diligence of making sure that it is done properly and doesn't spill into the creeks and everything else. I mean, it's both are going to be expensive processes, and you may have to replace. One might outweigh the other, but bottom line, that the situation should still be remedied. But at such a time as now, where there is no sewage even offered, that would be a rather large expenditure for one person to put in that much sewage line himself.
Well, this doesn't require this. Alan, this doesn't require anybody to connect unless it's extended. It doesn't require an extension. It just simply says if lines are extended, then lots will connect. Those extensions, it doesn't require anybody to pay for anything. It just says when extensions are put in place, lots will connect to the sewer or water lines.
Okay.
Are y'all in agreement with that?
So is the discussion on this item 3 of eliminating the first section about prohibitions, whatnot, keeping when public water or sewer lines are extended and clarifying perhaps the heading of that changes from private wells and septic systems to conversion, required conversion to public systems.
That would-
So
Okay.
It's already covered in the title.
So are we suggesting just leaving that sentence as is, if we go with Mason's recommendation?
And I thought we were gonna add subject to the requirements of whatever the
I
statute.
had that, and, I would suggest us adding at the end, change the period to a comma and say, unless a private well is otherwise permitted per GS 87-97.
Private well or sanitary waste system.
Well, that 87.
Oh, that's only
97
wells.
only deals with water systems. So it had to be unless a private well is otherwise permitted per NCGS 87-97-2.
Yes, from time to time.
Yep.
Okay, Mason, you all right with that?
Great, thank you.
Okay, so you've got the new title, we've got that sentence. So let's go on to section 2, right under that. Any changes? The paragraph, so we already did that.
Yeah, we already
We already did that. Okay, and then we go all the way down to section 4. Page 7. Where are you down?
Well, in that section 3 dedication,
Yeah.
I guess he's got the highlighted part, but it just kind of stops. The paragraph just kind of stops. I don't know if we need to read the rest of it. I don't have any
Oh, that's-
suggestions.
I think it just needs a period.
If any person connected to the public water utility system, period.
Oh, wait, let's see. Sorry. No person.
I think the last of the sentence was this paragraph is left out. I don't know if it's just a few words or how much it is, and I don't know if it changes the highlighted portion.
Okay, I'll check that.
Okay.
In my page,
Yeah, mine does.
maybe one that put out yesterday. I mean, I'm not suggesting any changes.
My apologies. That may have been a copy paste error.
Okay.
They just think there's several incompletions. of that paragraph.
Subject to Scott just checking to make sure the same structure. Okay, so 3 is okay. 4. This is still extension, so I think this is okay. This gets into those costs at the very, the highlighted reimbursement. The payments from future users benefit from the old facilities.
So this is where the town is not putting it in, but someone like me or Alan was able to put in the sewer. Neither of us are, but we were able to put in the sewer, that there would be a provision for us being reimbursed as future neighbors came online and used it.
This is all private.
Right. So, then there's a question for town manager and town attorney as to whether or not that's legal, because I'd asked that question. I'd asked the question, could we, property owners up there, me and Alan and others, agree to pay for the extension of sewer up there? Because only the town can really do it. Us as private groups to build a public utility. And I asked that question, I don't think you're sure of that answer. That's in the ordinance question. Can we do that, Susan?
So the question, which portion of, so section 4, cost of extensions, and you're asking about reimbursements? Is there,
Well, no, that's a separate question. Can Alan and I and 8 others petition the town to put in the sewer? And if they will, we will agree to be assessed, just as we're done on a Peace and Providence. We'll be willing to be assessed the annual and monthly fees to pay for that installation. And the comment I got back was, I don't think you can because it's ETJ.
That would be my concern. I'd need to look at the statute on those special assessments. But I'm not sure that it will work in the ETJ. Peace and Providence are in the town.
I understand. My argument would be that since you're controlling our zoning, that the town is the only one who could do it. So it's just a question whether it's legal. So
And
if you check that.
I would need to look at the statute.
Thank you.
and to clarify, are you also asking about private funding of public infrastructure?
Well, you've already referenced, yeah, so you should make sure that it's legal what's in here, Susan. What's in here would be property doing that. When at the library.
Okay, so y'all will work on that. My thinking now is that we're gonna rush this if we try to get this done so they can have to. Solve it. And present September 9th. If we can even do it then. So maybe take it up, see where we are. Then.
Certainly.
Get the understanding of that. Because we need to get it right. Y'all agree with that? So if we could have the revisions set out.
Certainly.
Okay, going on to number 5 on page 8. Have any changes? Anybody have anything to that? Section 3, public extensions of the utility system. Anything on 1, 2? Three at the bottom of the page.
And that's the question that's just been given to the town attorney. About special assessments in the ETJ.
Okay. 4 on the next page. 9. Okay, then Scott, going down to section 6, extension outside town limits is highlighted. Scott, you want to explain?
Sure. Just highlighting this section, which it's explicitly calling out extensions outside town limits. All extensions of public utilities outside the town corporate limits shall be subject to the Board of Commissioners. And then coming down under application, it's reading, no private water line or system shall be approved for connection to the town's water system unless at the same time adequate sewerage services are available to the property to be served by the proposed water line and the property owner has connected to the MSD sewerage system.
So you would change that to wastewater and take out the MSD part.
If we're keeping a consistency with the other language, yes.
I had suggested that go down to the first 3 lines would be correct. No private water line or system shall be approved, or would stay. I'm not saying correct, would stay. No private water line or system shall be approved for connection to the town's water system unless at the same time adequate sewerage services are available for the property to be served by the proposed water line. And I would suggest deleting the rest of it and inserting either by connecting to the MSD sewage system if available to the subject property, if not, then by private septic system approved and regulated by the Buncombe County Health Department.
Here, would you go slow now and read this?
Sure, I just want to make sure it landed. It seemed okay so far. So we go to the 3rd line where it says to be served by the proposed water line, comma, either by connection to the MSD sewage system, comma, if reasonably available to the subject property. Correct, comma. And if not, then by private septic system approved and regulated by the Buncombe County Health Department, period. The rest of that sentence would be deleted
Right. So
by the Buncombe County Health Department.
May I enter?
if not, what?
Oh, and if not, then by private septic system approved and regulated by the Buncombe County Health Department.
Can I add some context to this conversation? The way that our water billing and sewer billing work is the town is billed on the water usage. When MSD bills the town, the MSD sends a bill to the town collects with our MSD fees with our water bills. But the way that there's no meter for sewage. So the way that they assess how much we owe for sewage is by how much water is used. So if we're allowing homes to connect to water and not sewage, we're still going to be billed for their sewage because they're billing based on the total water consumption of the town.
So you're saying that just in a hypothetical, if a property is connecting to town water yet not connected to MSD sewer, there is no direct.
They're still going to be billed for sewer.
Okay.
They have the septic system.
because the sewer bill is based on water usage.
That's the nexus. Yeah.
Does that mean if they have a well and I don't tap city sewer, what if you had a situation where you had a well but no septic
Then you would not be billed for
sewage? You would not be billed for sewage even though you're using it.
So, yes, so if you had yeah, that's correct, yes.
This is where the other is to connect the final water line to. It's either got a connection to it and through septic system. It's gonna have to be in there.
Sorry, could you just read into the
He's
No
gonna
worries.
get billed for sewage. He's gonna take that into account in the question whether to.
So, so there are two scenarios that I think Dan was pointing out. One is that if somebody connects to the town water, but not the town sewer or the MSD
MSD.
sewer, they're still going to be billed by MSD because the water usage is how the billing is assessed.
Mhm.
The flip side of that is if somebody connects to MSD sewer, but not town water, we're not going to have a way of billing them for sewer. So essentially going to be getting their sewage services for free.
Hmm.
I think both scenarios are problematic.
That's where the mandatory connection is.
But in some situations, we cannot require them to connect to the water. Or that's
This
that.
is where they want to. This is where the private water. use-
The waivers is saying that's why we need to require it to avoid that anomaly that.
Right.
Well,
Alex
I guess,
discussed.
I guess what I'm hearing just quickly is from a cost of service and a nexus or a cost of service standpoint, it almost sounds like an all or nothing proposition, at least for the purposes of indexing and assessing the cost of a service, i.e., you have a property in the ETJ or in the town limits that it currently has no services to speak of. They are trying to connect to town water either because they cannot or do not want to establish their own independent well. So the minute they're connecting to town water, the nexus for the cost of services is kicked in for MSD, even if they don't have, well, yeah. So not to try and simplify it and say it is an all or nothing proposition, but for the purposes of the cost of service, that's what it seems to be on the face of it. I'm not quite sure, and this would probably this would probably be again. I know I keep talking about larger policy discussions, but if someone's wanting to have a quote unquote hybrid option, either well and MSD or town water and septic, I think that's something that would probably require further research on how you could A, legally do that, and B, actually establish a basis for the cost of the service. Am I stating that correctly? I mean, both from I guess it's a town, so obviously that the town has control and provision of its water system. That's a policy decision and a cost implication for the town. And you're saying by proxy of water provision of water service that cost is indexed to your MSD billing. So
the general concept is that water in, water out. So
Right.
the amount of water that you use is going to be the amount of water that the MSD is
Treats.
processing. The current situation is that if you have one, you're required to have the other. And if we break that requirement, I don't know if we have the capacity under our agreement, our billing agreement with MSD to bill separately. And we certainly don't have the capacity to meter sewerage.
I don't think the situation's going to rise that much, is it? And simplify what we're talking about right here. We're only talking about extensions outside the town limits. We're not talking about a lot of situations where either of those scenarios could arise at all, but in fact, it could. And all we're dealing with is this language here saying no private water line or system shall be approved for connection to the town unless they have sewer service. And we're just saying they just have to prove that they have some sewage service either by connection to MSD if it's available. If not, they have a septic system approved by the Buncombe County Health Department. And that's, we just require them to have proof of one of those two before we give them water service.
And what this meeting was to do was just try to get rid of that double deal
Prohibitions.
that you can't get a septic permit when you've got in this documentation that's not legal to prohibit that. So I've got 2 septic permit applications in process right now. And so you're just trying to do that.
Yeah, and if
And get that done because this other might take a longer conversation.
And if we change that language to what I've suggested, I think that would cover your situation. You would prove to them you have the septic permits from the Buncombe County Health Department, and therefore they'll allow you to connect to the water.
Even though you would still be billed for sewage.
Correct. Bill just,
That's just a
Wade just
monetary
has to
decision.
understand that. He'll be paying for sewage service even though he's got a septic.
Alex,
I agree with Dan.
So suppose the water line is easier to connect for whatever reason, it's closer. But the sewer is way far away. And to connect to the sewer line, it's going to cost us a fortune. Whereas the water line would be convenient. So we would still require connect.
If it's 300 feet away,
Under the current, I'm sorry, under the last zoning ordinance, and I think under the current zoning ordinance, the one connection would require the other. You couldn't connect to the water without connecting to MSD, or you couldn't connect to MSD without connecting to the water system. I don't know how to change that billing problem. I'm not sure how to address that. It's certainly a conversation we can have with MSD, but I don't know that there is a simple answer to that.
And that would be an economic decision for the owner.
but if they're more than 300 feet away from the MSD line, they wouldn't require, MSD would not require them to hook up.
Right.
Then they would have,
So that's the wastewater issue.
that's where it comes to the septic.
The water issue though is, and again, this is a town, because town water is under the, it's under the purview of the town. I guess that's what I'm just openly asking from a policy and a cost of services standpoint. Is that in the town's interest, ability, call it what you will, to provide a town service to properties outside of town limits?
So in terms of the cost for service on the water side, we could bill property owners in the ETJ just like we bill property owners in town limits for water consumption. The problem is the water fund doesn't pay for itself entirely. It pays for general operations. It's self-sufficient, but for any capital improvement projects, we usually subsidize that from the general fund. So that would be town taxpayers paying for capital improvement projects in the ETJ. Without the ETJ tax, they wouldn't be taxed for that essentially. So the water fund operationally is self-sufficient, but not in improvements. That is subsidized by the general fund.
The town could adopt a differential rate for the ETJ though, could it not, to make sure that that is remedied? That's done in Florida.
I think that's been adjusted at the General Assembly level. I'm not sure if we could or not anymore. It used to be the case that we could do that. I'd have to do some research to find out if we could do differential rates currently.
But even if you couldn't, as I understand what you're saying, the owner could still do it if the owner realized that he was going to be billed for sewer services.
So there's two different questions. One is about the water sewer and one is just about the water system in general. Yes, to answer your question, we could have a situation where we were billing for water and sewer, even if somebody had a septic system. The other question that I think Scott was asking is about the cost of improvements in general, and whether or not it was an economically prudent decision for the town to extend water lines in the ETJ or anywhere.
But I thought this one was really only where the private owner wanted to connect. This paragraph deals only with the
Right.
private water line. So that really doesn't come into play in this section.
In that section, that's a problem.
So if we, again, I'm trying to move this on, I'm not trying to cut anything
Sure.
off. But just add Dan's language about either by connection to the MSD or having a wastewater system, septic system integrated.
Right.
Okay. Are we happy with that? Or are we ready to move on?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I hesitate to do this, but I'd like to go back, if I could, to set paragraph 4 on page 7. Something was passed over. I just need to bring in paragraph 4, and I may have a different version than the one in front of you, but I cannot make any sense out of the second sentence in that paragraph.
I don't have section 4 on page 6. I've got one on
Seven.
On page
Seven.
7.
This is under cost of extension.
It says the town may, in the sole discretion of the Board of Commissioners, enter into agreements to provide for the potential future without first delivering the properly executed written instrument of dedication and conveyance, the act of connecting. It's all jumbled. I don't know what it means. At least this was the copy that was furnished to me with Scott's email. The second thing is, if you go further down, about halfway through, the word reimbursement sentence that starts with, it says, the right to clear the easement, clear of obstructions, comma, trees and shrubs, period. At that point, the word reimbursement is the beginning of a sentence and needs to be capitalized.
This was,
We think we got incomplete copies, so between now and the next meeting, Scott, will you check to make sure that's complete?
I
This-
can check.
this
This
whole section is-
this section was pulled directly from the general ordinance.
And see, Mason, if you go up to 3, right above that 4 that you're talking about, it just kind of stops. And there's actually about 5 or 6 more lines that were left off. I think we just got incomplete versions of those sections.
Okay,
that's
Scott,
fine.
work with me on this because my copy of this 4 is a mess and we don't want to send it to the commission like this.
I will recheck that.
Just as
Okay.
part of your work between now and the next meeting. Is that okay, Mason?
Yep, that's great.
Right.
I just didn't want to gloss over those problems.
Mr. Chairman, if we could go back to that section 6 that we were just dealing with before Mason's question. Extent,
Page is that on?
this on page 9.
Okay.
In the, we've been dealing with the subsection 1 application in that second paragraph. But if we go back up to the introductory paragraph, it's very minor, but the second sentence, beginning on line 3, middle line 3, says after action has been taken by the Director of Public Works, blah, 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 and recommendation have been made to the Commissioner Board shall consider an act upon approval and disapproval of the application. And I can find no reference to the application, so I would suggest change the to the word any, then application for extension. So they will approve or disapprove an application for extension.
Okay,
And then later it gets into the application later on, but I think just to throw in the application without knowing what application we've been talking about. So it's a very minor change, but just say.
Scott, you got those? Okay. All right, then moving back on, we're now over the number 2 on page 10, I believe. I didn't have any changes for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
I think that's it.
and that's it. So I think that, is that it, Scott? And then you got your conclusions of the Buncombe laws. These are just general references. which I think we've dealt with.
So I think that if those changes are pulled together for the next meeting, I think that would address the initial piece of no, you have to have MSD sewer when it's 1,000 feet away. But on extension of other stuff, I have submitted an application for the water line, water service up there, and that has been, I get payment $950, but it has been denied because of other requirements of the general ordinances. We're not going to go into that obviously right now, but what I have done that I think would be very helpful, I have cleared 3 lots in ETJ. I have staked 2 small houses. I've staked septic fields, so forth. I've cleared right away to connect to the water line. So, and I've got string and tape and paint on the ground and everything else, so that I've got actual examples that you could go up there and I can point out this is what affects this, this is what affects that, this is why this neighbor's well means this house can't have a septic, and you can see it on the ground.
So if anybody would like to do that, just connect up with Wade. But I thought we just determined that if you wanted to connect the water, you had to put in sewer.
You don't have to put in the sewer, you're gonna be charged for, you can put in the septic if, you know, what do you call it, perks
Yes.
You're right.
properly, and so,
That's right.
yeah, you're just paying extra for it, which seems a little bit unnecessary, but that's the way they do it.
But there are other general, my point is there are other general ordinance pieces that stop. We have 5 lots, and the general ordinance piece that stops on every one. So there's more than just this one thing which can have. Septic, which is 13 feet away. And so I've got those examples. And, I'm obviously anxious to share with everybody what I've discovered, and it's just hard to do on this paper. But when you look and say, this is the area that septic would fit in, but within that area, this is specifically what the county has flagged as the only part of that area they could put the septic in. And
Because of the condition.
because of condition. And when you see all that, it'd be so much easier to understand. Because there is the connection to water that I'm not allowed to do. There is the 30-foot setback in the extreme. There's any number of things that if you look at on the ground with string and tape and paint, you can, now I get it. I haven't been studying this stuff all my life, but as a school teacher, whatever else, I can get this now.
So I'm
So if
hearing,
anybody would like to do that, Wade will make himself available.
hearing a suggestion for a site visit and a field trip perhaps?
I'm not making that suggestion.
Okay.
I'm just saying if anybody would like to do that, they may. And if there's some feeling that we ought to do that.
I'm begging for it.
And one thing I was wondering, and again, I don't know if this would help you, but what about the possibility of changing and redesigning the lots? They're not individually, I mean, if you want 5 lots up here, if you're gonna try to work on like three joint lots, does that help at all? Or,
But let's don't talk about specifics.
okay.
Okay, I think we're done for today, and I want to appreciate y'all's patience and your thoroughness. Just looking at the schedule for September 9th, which I think Scott sent out to everybody too. I think we're going to finish this up first, and then we'll move into the stormwater. But this will probably take a good bit of our time.
Like I say, by agreement, can we agree that we will not be talking about signage, so we don't have to review
Right.
all of that
We're-
stuff?
Yeah, we're not gonna be talking about science, but we'll do this first. And then we'll, if we do have time, we'll start in this one.
But we will not get the signage
We will
until,
not get the sign.
Good.
So Scott, will you? Okay, I apologize for the going back and forth in the meeting. It just didn't seem to have an order. You could really follow because we were all trying to get our points in. But I appreciate your diligence and the town does. And
good progress.
with that, is there any other observation, question, et cetera, other than from Wade?
I'm with you on that. So stormwater, which is listed for the ninth. Stormwater, which is listed for the ninth, began with my November presentation of the last century. And we still haven't taken any action or sort of gotten any conclusions. So I had prepared and given you all one of these about a year ago. And then we didn't go any further. Here, I've got another one for you today. Angie will have it. It'll be digital. I have a few copies for whoever here and doesn't have it. It's just 3 pages that says when you have to have a stormwater permit and what you have to do. The rest of it is just the stormwater ordinance where relevant lines are underlined in yellow. And so I'm asking that you look at those in advance of whenever it is it's going to be on the ninth.
Probably gonna, I hope that we don't take as much time with this. Shouldn't we, because we'll have the language before us. And hopefully that's
And the 60 seconds that I would beg for right now is that the presentation I made in November had a conclusion that I wasn't able to get to because of limitations of time. But it was a argument on proportionality where a single homeowner had to put in this kind of a system, which was $30,000. And I was pointing out that our bigger issues were catching sediment and slowing water. And I did submit this drawing at that meeting. And it was where right across the street, we could catch tremendous amounts of sediment with a larger approach. And then this is from the stormwater study by Blue Earth, pointing out exactly what I pointed out, where tons of sediment washed in with every piece.
So what do you want us to do?
And then
Read these two?
I want you to read them, but I'm just letting you know this is extra. And because the second thing I pointed out was that Lake Susan needed a major catch basin. So now it's Lake Susan's beach. And so those will be available. And I'm asking that you put whatever time you can into looking through that material in advance of when we discuss it. Thank you.
Okay, is there any more business to come before us? Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
That is not debatable. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate it. Scott, I really appreciate it. Sure. Susan, thank you for coming. It's always helpful. So we'll meet again on the 9th. And maybe Susan, you'll get that with him.
And if everyone could turn their mics off, just pushing the button down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great job as always.